Hey everyone, Farsight's Time Cross Project, March 2017. How did we do? Remote viewers working at the Farsight Institute in our ongoing and monthly Time Cross project predicted in significant detail the major news events for March 2017 using remote viewing, all done and published on YouTube for all to see in February 2017, the month before the events happened. Again, we do this every month, so if this is new to you, it is time to tune in. What you are watching now is the results summary for March 2017, where we compare our remote viewing predictions that were published in February to the actual news events for March. Now, to keep track of the major news events for the month, we publish a news analysis table on our website. And if you are interested in seeing the full list of major events for March 2017, the website is where to find it. Now, we had 3 remote viewers working for this edition of the Time Cross Project: Dick Allgaier, Princess Janae, and Aziz Brown. Starting with Dick Allgaier, and as he has done sometimes in the past, he began by reporting a number of brief perceptions that he calls tagging. Now, these are not full remote viewing sessions, just perceptions that are essentially brief mental images relating to various events that will happen the following month. He also did one full remote viewing session, which I will cover in just a bit. Now, for Dick's tagging perceptions, he first reports trouble with the International Space Station. He sees the ISS as essentially in 2 parts, although he says he does not think the ISS is going to break in half. There is some shielding problem that threatens the crew. Well, as it turned out, that is exactly what happened in March. Astronauts working on the International Space Station made some mistakes, and they lost some important shielding, requiring emergency makeshift repairs. The shielding was very large, and it protected the ISS from small meteorites that could puncture or damage the space station. Now, the shielding literally drifted away, and from a perceptual perspective, that left the ISS in 2 parts. This major event was not covered in our featured news outlets, although it was heavily covered in other major mainstream news outlets. Now, Dick's next tagging exercise has something to do with Charles Manson, and Dick wonders if this means that Manson might pass away in March. He says Charles Manson would be in the news again in March. Well, as it turns out, Charles Manson did not die in March, but there was news about him in March. On March 17th, ABC broadcast a major documentary about Charles Manson, which included dramatic and never-before-seen prison interviews. Now, after that, Dick Allgaier begins his first full remote viewing session, which is much more in-depth than a brief tagging exercise. He reports perceiving a large water event with extreme flooding. It reminds him of the very threatening situation that occurred in February in California with the Oroville Dam, but he does not describe a dam or anything that looks like the Oroville Dam, which has a very distinct V-shaped architecture. Now, such a dam would have been hard to miss for a good remote viewer like Dick, so I assumed from the very beginning that this event had nothing to do with that dam. Rather, he focuses on extreme flooding with the emphasis on extreme. It involves a mountainous area with farmland below. The land is saturated with water, and water levels everywhere are rising catastrophically. There are rescue helicopters, relief supplies, search and rescue and recovery operations, body bags, law enforcement involvement, and acts of heroism. Well, as it turns out, this is exactly what happened in Peru during the month of March. Over 70 people were killed. There were huge downpours, and high ocean temperatures were blamed. Body bags were all over the place, just as Dick described. Helicopters evacuated tourists from Machu Picchu in a manner that closely paralleled Dick's descriptions, and homes were washed away. Much of this was caught on breathtaking video. The catastrophe extended through the entire month of March, and it even spread into the countries of Ecuador and Colombia. Amazingly, this major event was barely covered or not covered at all in some of our featured news outlets. However, it was extensively covered in a large group of other mainstream news outlets. Next, Princess Genet presented 2 remote viewing sessions where she describes 2 separate events for March. Now, in her first session, she describes a huge storm event, sort of a day after tomorrow weather event involving cold weather and lots of snow. She focuses on a city or large town and even describes an aircraft in trouble and possibly a crash. It is highly unusual weather for that location during that time of year. It is a potential natural disaster, abnormal blizzard-type weather. Well, as it turned out, the very much out-of-season winter storm Stella slammed the east coast of the United States around March 14th. The risk to aviation was extreme, and 8,800 flights were canceled. There were 2 feet of snow in some areas, and some areas were spared the worst, such as New York City, but other areas were blanketed thoroughly. The news build-up for the storm was off the scale in many major news outlets, sending pre-storm panic to the stratosphere. However, the storm was only minimally covered in some of our featured news outlets. To our knowledge, there was no airplane crash involving Stella, but there was an airplane crash in another area that was involved with extreme weather during that time, Peru. It is possible that Princess mixed her perceptions of those 2 events due to the fact that they occurred in the same month and the fact that both regions were involved in major weather events. On March 28th, Peruvian Airlines passenger jet Flight 113, a Boeing 737, crashed and burned at an airport near a mountainous region in Peru. Minus the snow, the geography and events of the crash very much matched that described by Princess. Sometimes things like that happen with remote viewing, especially when the primary gestalts are similar for separate events, as was the case in this situation with disastrous weather and threats to aviation in both places at the same time. Now, for Princess's second target, she describes a fire event in a sparsely populated area with hills, a natural environment, some structures, and only a few subjects. This is a rural, green environment. There is extensive smoke and sounds of roaring fire. The subjects are primarily Caucasian with mostly dark hair. They speak English, but with an accent. Well, as it turns out, March 2017 was the month of the Great Texas Panhandle fires, and what Princess describes closely matches what actually happened in those fires. The fires burned over 1 million acres, killing more than 7 people and over 1,500 cattle. It was the 3rd largest fire in Texas's history. The fire spread into Kansas and Oklahoma, carrying a significant economic impact. The fire was huge news in many mainstream news outlets, but it was barely or not at all covered in our featured news outlets. Now, when this happens, this does not minimize the importance of an event. Rather, it points to the inadequacy of some major news outlets in covering a wide spectrum of events, which is why we do not rely on only our 4 featured news outlets in listing events in each month's news analysis table for this project. Finally, Aziz Brown had 2 remote viewing sessions for 2 separate events in March 2017. In his first session, he describes several large metal ships on water, not too far from land. The subjects are primarily male, and they are wearing uniforms. Many have black hair, and on some ships the subjects have olive or Asian skin tones. Now, orders are being given. 3 ships in particular are relatively close together. There is tension on the ships. There is a standoff. No shots are fired, and the ships withdraw from the tense standoff after a day. Well, as it turns out, On March 14th, the United States, Japan, and South Korea started major naval war exercises off the coast of North Korea, largely in response to North Korea's recent firing of ballistic missiles. Tension in the area was high, to say the least. Fortunately, and as Aziz describes in his session, the ships withdrew and no shots were fired. For Aziz's second target, he describes a very strange event, and I must admit that when I first saw his session, I could not imagine how such a thing could happen. He describes a sudden upward rush of energetics, as the ground seems to explode, creating a large crater. There are subjects with hard hats or helmets and working clothes right in front of the explosion. Brown debris and dirt flies upward with incredible force. The subjects are shocked. The immediate area is generally flat, although one can see hills as you look farther away from the explosion. Now, the base surface is natural, just rocky dirt on the ground. The subjects have some equipment and tools. 24 hours after the ground erupts, there's a crater or deep hole where the explosion took place. Well, as it turns out, this is exactly what happened during the month of March, and fortunately for our project, it was all caught on video. On March 16th, Mount Etna erupted significantly in a new location that was being traversed by a group that included a BBC film crew. The explosion from the ground was totally unexpected, and it happened right in front of the group. 10 people were injured, and there was a dramatic escape, all caught on camera. The huge explosion from the ground was captured on camera by the BBC film crew. They were lucky they all made it out alive. So, that is how we did for predicting the major news events for March 2017, all with remote viewing sessions conducted and published on YouTube for all to see in February 2017. Friends, this is not easy to do, and to be honest, this is the first time in known human history where this is being done repeatedly on a monthly and controlled manner for such an extended period of time. Now, for those of you who are watching, you are on the front row of a revolution in thought the likes of which this planet may have never seen before. This is really important, cutting-edge science at its best. You are helping by simply watching. In addition to our Time Cross project, we also do mysteries projects, and if you have not already done so, I hope you also get a chance to watch our recently released mysteries project on the Roswell UFO crash. It is 3 hours of spine-tingling detail from 3 really great remote viewers. And do remember to watch our other mysteries projects as well, such as the investigations into the 9/11 events, the assassinations of John F. Kennedy and Martin Luther King, the psychology of Adolf Hitler, and some amazing explorations into UFOs and extraterrestrial life. As always, all Farsight remote viewing work is done under totally blind conditions with no communication between any of the remote viewers. It is also good to remember that when you watch our mysteries projects, you are helping us at Farsight do our work, including the funding for our Time Cross project, which we offer free to the public, but which does cost us a few $1,000s to do each month. We have no other significant source of income to pay the bills, so you really help when you follow and watch our activities and research. Finally, please remember to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Farsight Press, to keep up with the latest. There is nothing like Farsight anywhere else on the internet. You can find information about all of our present and past activities on our website. Also on our website, you can sign up for our free email newsletter. So stay ahead of the curve. Let the mainstream fade in the dust. Be there now.